a brand new series called, it's not super creative, but incredibly important, Jesus. Yes, because you know I love to talk about Jesus. People will say, what you going to preach about, brother? I'm going to preach about Jesus. Some way or another, we're definitely going to preach about him. I'm going to preach about God, as it were, and just know that he has things to say to us. And I'm concerned, candidly, and I'll cover this in week 1, about maybe our perspectives regarding God, regarding Jesus, and that, frankly, we've forgotten a lot of things about who he is. At least that's evidenced in the way that we live, act, and interact, because that's not maybe what the Lord would will for us. And so it causes me to believe that certainly in our culture and in our world, but also, come on everybody, in the church, we often struggle with just remembering. Remembering's hard. That's the thing, right? We used to remember a lot of stuff. Remember when we used to remember stuff? Yeah, so I'm showing my age right now. Some of you are like, okay, well, maybe you struggle to remember. Well, we used to remember, for instance, phone numbers. Remember that? Remember? Okay, some of you don't. Some of you straight line right now. You're like under 25, and you're like, it's a name. You got a name, you push that, and then it talks to them and whatever. Yeah, we didn't know, okay, I'm going to throw some bones for the old people today. We didn't know George Jetson was going to come true. We didn't know that was happening, right? But this just happened. Like, I only found out about this week. My in-laws actually got rid of their landline. They watch sometimes too. My mind is blown. That was my longest running remembered phone number, 501-851-2471. You can call it if you want. It'll say disconnected. They don't even have that anymore, man. Sometimes people, they'll ask you what's your phone number, and you got to go, oh. We used to remember stuff. Remember when we could remember directions? And if we didn't, we got out a map, and it wasn't an app. It was a map. It was like a piece of paper. You had to unfold it. And the young people are going, oh, man, nostalgia. I've seen that at the kids' museum. Maps. Those were cool. I have a map collection. I'm not a hoarder. I just like Karen sitting right over there. I like maps. I have maps of eastern North Carolina before the I-40 came from Raleigh. I still have those. It's pretty interesting to see. Apparently it took longer to get here. And if you couldn't find your way, if your map was insufficient, you pulled over on the side of the road and some dude crawled out from under a car with a grease rag, and he said, well, you go right down there, and you turn left by that big tree. And you actually had to remember what he said. And then somebody messed it up. They started writing stuff down, and then they were like, well, you should put this on your phone. Your phone. Can you imagine if in the 80s someone would have said, hey, someday your map will talk to you? We would have prayed for them. I pray for you. Hallelujah. I think you might need some deliverance. Your map's going to talk to you. Yeah, and you'll be able to see your wife's face on the phone when you talk to her. Wow. Listen, obviously, it's amazing that we can look up anything. We can self-teach and learn on demand. I work on vehicles a lot, and I have quite a bit of previous history of being a little bit of a backyard mechanic, and I work on some people's cars in the church occasionally. I wouldn't get too excited about that, but I also can YouTube it. What is this going to be, when it grows up, if I don't break it or something. It's amazing. It's amazing. But the issue is, hear me now, we don't commit things to memory much anymore, and that especially matters in regards to God. We can Google anything, and again, awesome. I'm glad that we get to study. We don't have to go to a faraway campus somewhere to access information or to learn, and all of that's good, obviously. There's not even an argument against that. But there are some things we're meant to remember not just here, and we need to remember them here, and we don't, but we need to remember them here. And this was an issue in Jesus' day too. It was actually years, decades before Jesus that David, the psalmist, wrote in Psalm 105:5, and this was also something that shows up in 1 Chronicles, but he said, remember the wonders he, meaning God, has performed, his miracles. and the rulings he has given. I'm concerned, as David was, that we've forgotten God, forgotten who he really is. We've marginalized his teachings and his perspective, his authority, and we've forgotten his true identity, that he is God, right? And the weight of that. And many, as I said, many people in Jesus' day had forgotten that too. And in fact, to them, he had become one of many, which was a constant stumbling block for the people of Israel pre-Messiah, right? Was that it wasn't that, oh yeah, he's a God, but they didn't necessarily see him as the God. And so one day, Jesus, in our story we'll pick up today, decides to address this. And I'll pick the story up in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" Now, I know right from the get-go there, the question becomes why, for me, it becomes why here? Why would he ask this question at Caesarea Philippi? I was chatting this out a little bit earlier, and Kenzie, my assistant, she said, yeah, because it sounds like a really good salad dressing, right? Caesarea Philippi. That was for her. She's on the live stream right now. That was your joke. It went okay. It was not great. Why Caesarea Philippi? He could have asked this question in Galilee. He was in Galilee just a short time before that. He could have asked the question there. He had a huge crowd. He could have asked it when he just fed 4,000 people. Once he fed 5, now he's fed 4 with 7 fish, right? Or 7 loaves and a couple of fish. And so that miracle had just happened. There was a huge crowd there. He could have said, who do men say that I am? He could have asked that there, but he asked this specifically in Caesarea Philippi. So a bit of history about Caesarea Philippi. In fact, during the time of Jesus, this was such a decadent place that modern biblical scholars have said it would have been an ancient Las Vegas. I mean, it was a crazy broken place. It was Caesarea Philippi, said about 100 miles north of Jerusalem, which points to the fact too that Jesus, he moved around, everybody. I mean, he did some walking and talking, but Caesarea Philippi wasn't an easy place to get to. But it was on a Roman road, and it was about 25 to 30 miles outside of Galilee, where he did a lot of his public ministry. And now he walks on this road, and at this crossroads in Caesarea Philippi, a city that was full of people who were from Greek and Roman and even Jewish descent, sort of a little bit of a mixed group of people with mixed histories and hurts and brokennesses in Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi was a place that was named by Herod the Great's first son, Philip. And he named it after the Caesar, obviously. There's a little bit of a, hey, look, we're together on this. And him, Philip, Caesarea Philippi. And it sat at the base of Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon was the tallest mountain within 500 miles. It was the highest point you could see. It's a massive rock. You can visit it today if you do a tour of Israel. Huge mountain. And at the base of the mountain was a monument or a temple made to the Greek god Pan. And a few weeks ago, I know some of you are new to us today, but a few weeks ago I was preaching about Pan and Baal and those gods that historically had been worshipped for fertility, that in many cases even required in worship a firstborn child. The gods of fertility, and there was a temple to Pan, and it came out of a cave entrance to Mount Hermon, and out of the back of that cave, when the aquifer was high, the water would actually flow. And so people believed that the fertility gods they would have perceived to be underground, that when they were happy with you, the water came out. Had a little bit more to do with rain, but so they literally called that place. There was an entrance into that cave, the shrine to Pan, that was called the Gates of Hell. And in front of that, there was actually a temple that Herod the Great, the original Herod the Great, the one who tried to murder Jesus, that guy who found out from the Magi, 113 days till Christmas, in case anybody was wondering, but that guy who found out from the Magi that a king was to be born, they were following the star, and so he killed every baby 2 and under in an attempt to murder Jesus, that Herod the Great. And after a visit from Caesar Augustus, the first emperor of the Roman Empire, he stood in a position of power for 45 years. After a visit from him, he built a temple to him. In front of the temple that was built, or the shrine that was built to Pan, he built a temple to Caesar Augustus. After he died, the Romans deified him. They felt like he was a god. Are you following me right now? I'm talking about why did Jesus ask this question right here in Caesarea Philippi? Now he's standing in front of, on the backdrop, the mountain, there's a temple to Pan, and in front of that, to Caesar Augustus, a dead emperor, Caesar Augustus of Luke 2 fame, right? Luke 2, where Caesar said, the Bible tells us in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. I'm so excited I got to read Christmas scriptures this morning. I think it's fabulous here because this is God using an earthly emperor to orchestrate the fulfillment of a prophecy that he made 700 years ago in Micah 5:2, that Jesus would be born in Bethlehem. The Word of God tells us that Jesus also went up from Galilee, or Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, the fulfillment of the prophecy. Because that's where it was, the house of David. He was from the house of David, and that's where they had to go for the census. One last thing about Augustus. Augustus was popularly known as the Prince of Peace. It was actually a part of what was on the wall in the temple built for him. Because they had 45 years of peace, but what kind of peace was that? Who was it peace for? Was it peace for the peasant? Was it peace for the people who were occupied by the Romans and the Roman Empire? I don't think it was the right kind of peace. But now, the Prince of Peace, come on somebody, is a baby born in a manger that is living out the fulfillment of prophecy because God took someone who wasn't God and ordered their steps so that this could happen. And now, here he stands. Here he stands. Here stands Jesus, the baby that Herod tried to murder, in front of a temple that Herod built, in front of a temple that was built by the Greeks to the god Pan, and he's asking this question, who's really God? That's why he asked the question there. It was an important place for this specific and particular question. I'll give you a first takeaway. So I actually skipped the first takeaway, but I'll just jump to number 2. The best way to debunk deception is to contrast it with the truth. So here at 828, we preach for a little bit, and then we give a little bit of a synoptic. You missed the first synoptic. Sorry about that. It'll be in the notes on the app. But in regards to what I've just most recently said, I would say the best way to debunk deception is to contrast it with truth. That's what Jesus was doing. There's a lesson in that for us too. Sometimes I think we try to make a point from the wrong perspective. I would say to you that one of the ways that the devil loses, one of the ways that the lie of the enemy is debunked in my life is having relationships with someone like Tex or many of others amongst you in this crowd who follow God faithfully. And I see the evidence of who he is in your life. And in this case, Jesus was making a point. And sorry, I'm not finished asking questions about this question. I will be just after this. But why ask what others said or thought? That's interesting to me too. Who do men say that I am? Why? I mean, but we do that, right? And again, I think it was for the sake of contrast, but I'll give you another quick hitter, a takeaway. The religiously lost are never the right place to look for an accurate revelation about God or truth. And he's going to make that point. Like he's making that point by asking this question. And I specifically chose the word religiously lost. I kind of played with this quite a lot, prayed about it. But the answer that they gave, Matthew 16:13, was, well, they replied, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others say Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets. It's an interesting answer, and I don't know who they polled. I don't believe they asked the Greeks, the Romans. They must have asked some Jewish peeps, or I don't know that they asked, but their information, what they decided to share, came from that perspective. Maybe it was some of their own perspectives. Maybe they're still discerning and deciding about who Jesus is. But the reality is that answer is close. And it's not close at all. It's close, but it's not close at all. Maybe some say Elijah or John the Baptist, who had recently been beheaded, right? Maybe he resurrected and you're him. They think maybe you're him, but people didn't want to receive the reality that he was the Messiah. I'll give you another takeaway, and this one, I had fun with this. And I'm not sure you'll even be able to pick up what I'm about to say. But I travel this week. I'm going to give you a little precursor. I travel this week. I leave on Monday. I'll be back on Friday. I'll be here next Sunday. I'm amped. So if you do happen to follow me on Instagram and you see me on the other side of the ocean, I'll still be right back. But I'm going to sit on Monday in an Airbus 350 for 15 and a half hours on my way to Johannesburg. But here's the takeaway for you. Believing Jesus is good but not God will get you about as far as riding on the outside of a passenger jet. Thanks for laughing at that. Yeah, but it's true. You know, we've said for years. I mean, there's a difference in believing in and believing on. And it's significant even in the verbiage in the Bible. So often the word that's translated in literally means on. Believing on Jesus, like trusting in him. And if he doesn't come through, you fail. And that's who God is. He's that God. He's the God that we can trust on, not just believe in. Even the demons believe, the word says, and shudder, but to believe on him, to put everything you are and everything you have, everything that your life represents in his hands is what it means to know God, to really know who he is. And he's making that point. And then, verse 15, he asked them, but who do you say that I am? And there it is. There it is. That's the question. That's the question for us today. Who do you say? That's Jesus talking to each one of us. That's a question for us personally, certainly corporately, but individually. Who do you say that I am? And I know, look, I'm fully aware, often even here, and thanks for coming back. Thanks for persisting with us here at 828 Church. But I know there are times when maybe you're sitting there thinking, man, this dude is just over the top. Like, that, can't we just check church off the list? No. That hasn't worked, everybody. That's how the world and the church has become so broken. And you know I'm not a critic of the church. We are the church. And that's the bride of Christ, and you don't talk bad about another man's wife. Right? But in honest assessment says we've got some problems here. And checking church off the list is, listen, another caveat. It's critically important that we be faithful to the house of the Lord. I wish we could step that up. The average faithful church attender attends 2 out of 5 Sundays at this point in the history of the church, and you guys are killing it. Okay? You are awesome. I appreciate you being here and being here faithfully. But that matters. But just going to church is still not the answer, and I know that, and I think you know that too. We need to know who God is and live like we do. Know who God is and live like we do. Who do you say that I am? All right, I asked you what they said. He didn't even address it. He didn't even respond to what others had said. He just asked it for a point of contrast. And then he asked the real question, who do you? It doesn't matter. You can scroll Facebook or Instagram all you want. You're not going to find out who God is there. This is not a community conversation. There is a real and living God, and he speaks to each of us personally and specifically. And he loves you, and he came for you, and he died for you, and he didn't stay dead. And he's got a plan and a purpose for your life, or you wouldn't be here. Who do you say? Who do you say? Not what does Ron say? Who do you say? What does your life say? What does how you live and how you choose and what you believe and what you hope for? What does it say about who he is? Who do you say? Jesus. That's the title of the series. I just thought I'd randomly shout it out. I mean, that's the question. Do you actually know who I am? I mean, I feel like that's it. Do you actually know who I am? And what that means for you? For everyone? For everything? Did you ever think you knew someone but you didn't? Maybe that's the case. That happened to me. I got married. Right. I mean, and we dated for a minute. We had a couple of years behind us. And then there were times in that first year of our marriage where I was literally sitting against the wall in our house, talking to God, saying, I know her name. I'm pretty sure that's all. Like I literally felt like I didn't know her. Like I just had these sort of epiphany, kind of like, I don't know her. I clearly do not know her. I'm going to have to figure this out. I'm going to need some help. Or maybe you thought you knew someone, you walked up and you're talking to them. That's fun and awkward. I remember years ago when we were doing university ministry at Louisiana Tech, we were growing like crazy. Lots of people were coming to know Jesus, new people all the time. And there was someone I saw her at one of our weekly meetings, our weekly services, and I walked up and I'm chatting to her. I'm like, how's your mama Nim? That's a South Louisiana thing. I'm talking to her. And she's like, good. That face, good. I'm asking her these questions. I hit on a couple, just got lucky, like they were relevant questions, but I was just getting lucky on that. But her face, and I said, I'm just talking away, like she's my long lost friend. And then I just was like, I don't know you, do I? She's never seen you before. Hi, I'm Ron. Right? Whoa, you don't want that to be Jesus. I used to joke, how awkward would it be if you got to heaven and you're like rolling around, you're talking to people, and you're like, now, who are you? Oh, Jesus. When you get to heaven, you can miss on the bearded boat builder, or the king with a sling, or the cat that slept with lions. You don't have to recognize them, but you won't be there if you don't know Jesus. You won't even be there if you don't know Jesus. And then Peter answered his question. So good. So good. Simon Peter said, you're the Christ. You're the Christ. The Messiah. And I love Peterson just parenthetically put the Messiah in there, because the Christ, when he said Christ, that's what that meant. That delineation of Christ. He didn't just say you're Jesus. He said you're the Christ. The Christ, not a Christ, the Christ, which meant the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Now, come on, we're still in Caesarea Philippi. They got dead gods right there that people have sacrificed their children to. And he said, you are the Christ, the promised one, the Messiah, the Son of the not dead God. Come on, somebody. We need to believe we serve a living God. He is not dead. He is not done. Nobody gets to decide that, nor will they ever. And it is up to you what you believe about that. Not the world, not the brokenness, not me. It's up to me about me. That revelation changes everything. And I said it in a segue out of worship this morning here in Wilmington, but listen, there are people in this house and at South this morning, many people in both locations, and I'm sure some folks watching online too, in these spaces alone that have been changed by that revelation and the right application of it. Now, I feel like that last part of that sentence is important. Because again, knowing it right here ain't going to get it done. You need to know it here. Watch it work here. All the way to the hands and feet. Who Jesus is. Testify, somebody. Live a life that testifies. We have good friends visiting us from Virginia today. And in fact, if you come to the Welcome to Church dinner, I'll tell a story from when we first moved here that my friend Randy over here had shared. And Randy's dad went to be with Jesus years ago. But his favorite verse was 1 John 5:5. Who is he? That's a good question too. Who is he that overcomes the world? But he who believes that Jesus is the Christ. Who is it? It's the one who believes. The one that overcomes, the one who lives the life according to the plan that the Lord has for him or her, is the one who believes. Another takeaway for us is this: believing in and trusting Jesus as your God and guide, Savior and Lord, will lead to a well-lived life. I didn't say perfect. Did I say perfect? I didn't say perfect. Did I say perfect? I didn't say perfect. You still, come on now, you still going to have some problems, but lots of hope. Lots of help. Lots of joy. Joy that supersedes circumstance. Talking about the living God. That's bigger than all the difficulties we face. Correction, sure. For sure. This living God will bring it. I'm glad he does. I don't want somebody to let me walk into a pit and die, spiritually or physically. Correction, sure, but a boatload of grace. Boatload of grace. And love to go with it. And then verse 17, Jesus answered Peter and said, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." My Father who is in heaven has revealed this to you. And that's an important point too. I mean, Jesus was not just talking for the sake of talking. He was saying something when he said it. Because he was saying, look, you can't just know this in your head. You know, and listen, you're looking at a guy that is constantly communicating the factual foundation for believing in God. I want to be ready at all times, according to what Peter said, to give a defense of the faith of the hope that lies within me in regards to God. And I do it on this stage. I got all up into cosmology and physics last week. You know what I'm saying? Because I believe that there's a foundation, a factual foundation for faith. I do. But I understand that at the end of it, you don't know it because of flesh and blood. You don't know it because of your head. You got to know Jesus in your heart. Another takeaway for us in regards to that is this: head knowledge will never be enough for knowing Jesus. You have to know him in your heart. And then Jesus talked to Peter about who he was. And this is where I'll land this morning. But then he said to Peter, "And now I say that you are Peter." So look at that. He says, who do men say, and then who do you say that I am? And then he turns to Peter and said, "Now let me tell you who you are." I remember years ago when we were working again in student ministry, having a student that just disappeared. I don't know where she went. I asked them, I said, "Where did she go?" She just dropped out in the middle of the semester, good student. And they said, "Well, she went to Paris." Paris? Arkansas? There is a Paris, Arkansas. France? They said she's trying to find herself. I said, "Well, she's not there." I mean, I guess presently she was, but technically. And we spend our lives looking if we don't know who God is. Knowing who he is critical to knowing who you are and who you're made to be. And the reason that I believe our world lives so lost and so insecure and so confused and conflicted is because we've forgotten. 501-851-2471. There's some, we don't have to remember that phone number, but we better remember something. We better remember who God is. Because in knowing who God is, we get to know who we are. He said, "Now I say that you are Peter," which means rock. And upon this rock, again, contrasted, there's a rock right there, a big mountain right there. Biggest one for 500 miles. And whatever, he said, "Upon this rock I will build my church." I don't have time to dig into this. Come on, Carissa. But I will tell you that this is the first time in the New Testament the word church is mentioned. This set something in motion. And Jesus had waited to do this till now. But he said, "Upon this rock," the truth about who I am, certainly the strength of Peter's, ironically also named rock, right revelation, and all the powers of hell. Literally, the older, more traditional translations would say, "And the gates of Hades or hell cannot prevail against it." Remember what I said? They were standing below the temple to Pan, and now even there's an inscription that says, "The gates of hell." Jesus, man, everybody, he's funny, but he ain't no joke. He said that right there. "And the gates of hell." The broken and lost culture and world we live in will not prevail. Come on, somebody. The broken and lost world we live in will not prevail. And our war is not with flesh and blood. We fight for people, not with people. Every once in a while, it feels a little bit like we're fighting for. You can do that with your kids, too, if you've ever been a parent. You know you're fighting with them, but really what you're doing is fighting for them. Come on, somebody. Come on. Just keep that heart. "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." Only when you know who Jesus is can you really know who you're meant to be. And then verse 19, he said, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Isn't that amazing? So essentially he's saying, if you trust me with everything, I'll give you everything. I'll give you the power and authority that comes from the throne. And you can bind and loose according to the will of God, and it will be done, but it requires that we give him everything. I'm going to say it again. Trust Jesus with everything you are, and you will have everything you need. What a deal. The persistent pushback. But how can you, I don't want to give up that kind of control. The only way to not be out of control is to give God control. Number one. But people will say, how can you give your life to God? That's a flawed question. I didn't give it to God. He gave it to me. I just happen to remember who owns it, who it belongs to. It's not mine. My life is not my own, nor is yours. We were bought with a price. Come on, worship team. Here and at South. Galatians 2:20. I've been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, Paul wrote, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. This morning's poem is literally titled, Who Do You Say That I Am? Who do you say that I am? Jesus' question to each of us. Is he a simple Christian icon or the living God in whom we trust? Crucifix on demand, a prayer we pray in desperation, or God of heaven come down to earth, whose spirit moved to spark creation. Some would say an ancient myth, an exaggeration from the past. I say Alpha and Omega. He's the first. He's the last. He left no room for middle. No other gods can coexist. He's the one true God, or he isn't. That's a truth that can't be missed. He holds the singular position as our Savior and our King. To follow any other voice would surely be a foolish thing. It's in knowing who he is that we find out who we are. Life's greatest recognition, to know the one who bore our scars. Who do you say